Regardless if you're politically on the left, right, or anywhere in between, you probably know who Ben Shapiro is. Shapiro is a lawyer by education who currently works as a political commentator promoting conservative ideology for the Daily Wire. Ben Shapiro was dubbed the cool kids philosopher by someone who clearly needs their head examined. But regardless, Shapiro has a habit of speaking quickly and engaging in debates with college kids. So today, with an open mind, I am here to review Shapiro's best arguments and see if I can at least give him credit for arguing in good faith, even if I ultimately disagree with his takes. Most of these clips will be taken directly from Ben Shapiro's own channel, where it is purported that these are his best arguments against abortion.
Welcome back. This is the Ben Shapiro Show. We're taking your calls at 855-236-3228. That's 855-236-3228. Danny in New Jersey, you're on the Ben Shapiro Show. Go for it, Danny.
Hey, Ben, how are you?
Hey, doing well. Go for it, sir.
Good. Do you mind if I ask another abortion question?
No, go for it. All you, man.
All right. If a parent wants to abort their child, shouldn't they have the right to? So allow me to elaborate. If it is born, there's a possibility that the child won't be nurtured, loved, or treated with the proper care that a parent who desires a child would. Now, every child, especially if they're American, has the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, but a child that is neglected won't truly inherit these rights. I'm not sure if those on the left make this argument, but it's a question that one of my friends posed, and I didn't really know how to respond to it, but I wanted to hear what you had to say.
Yeah, I mean, the basic argument is not a very good one. The reason that it's not a very good one is because I'm a parent, okay? Being a parent is a pain in the ass. I mean, I'll be honest with you. Like, it can be great, but it is a giant pain in the ass. And very often you're unhappy with your children. Very often you feel incapable of ensuring that your children are getting the best possible upbringing. This is what it's called being a parent. Now, I happen to be in a particularly enviable situation, right? I have the ability for my wife to stay at home. I have a support system. We have a nanny, right? We have all sorts of resources that are available. I'm home a lot. We have a lot of resources available to my kid. Now, imagine that you are a single mom and you are impoverished, you're living on food stamps, and you're living below the poverty line. And let's imagine not that you're pregnant with a child. Let's imagine that you had the kid, and the kid is a year and a half old, right? You are in the exact same position as the woman who is pregnant, except now the kid has been born. Why shouldn't you be able to kill the kid?
You shouldn't be able to kill the kid because it is now an independent, viable person/human life, which I'll get into more a little bit later, but that's absolutely not the same.
I mean, because by the argument is that you're not going to be able to raise the kid in the circumstances proper to the child, guaranteeing them the best possible opportunity. So why is the child's right to life different now that the kid is born than before the kid was born? Because the argument that's being made is not about stage of development, and the argument that's not being made is about bodily autonomy or anything.
He immediately tries to pivot away from the bodily autonomy argument, saying, well, the argument is not about bodily autonomy. Well, it isn't according to who, Ben? According to you? Because, yes, the vast majority of people who believe in abortion rights believe that the woman's right to choose stems chiefly from her personal bodily autonomy. No one is saying that a fetus or an unborn child has zero rights. It's just that due to the fact that a fetus and its ability to live is pretty much entirely dependent on the mother carrying that fetus, her rights as a person supersedes the fetus's rights to live, because you are not, whether you're a fetus or another human being, you do not get to hold another person's body hostage because you need to live. You cannot demand my kidney or my liver so that you can live.
The argument is about the living circumstances of the child. So if the argument is living circumstances or future living circumstances of the child are insufficient to the needs of the child, therefore you can kill the child, that argument applies equally to kids who are born and kids who are unborn, which leads to the green lighting of infanticide based on circumstance.
Again, this is more classic straw man nonsense. It has nothing to do with the living circumstances of the child and everything to do with a woman's right to choose what she does with her body. This is all about bodily autonomy. And yes, if a woman chooses to have an abortion because of her circumstances, that is in fact a decision that she in fact can make. That it's entirely up to her because it's her body, her uterus. I don't understand what's so complicated about that for Ben Shapiro to understand.
Again, the key issue with abortion is not the circumstances in which kids grow up, because there are literally billions of kids who are growing up around the planet right now in rather unenviable circumstances, and killing them would be pure murder. The real question about abortion is whether this is a kid or is not a kid.
Gotta love the intentionally misleading language. A fetus, particularly one that has not yet reached a point of viability, is not a kid. It is still a fetus. A kid is a fully formed human being. Okay? That's not the same thing as a fetus. But if you use that language, you make it sound more horrific.
You're on the Ben Shapiro Show. Go for it, Art.
Hi, Ben. Big fan of the show. I'm a new subscriber as well. My question is about the homeless crisis.
Yes.
I live in the Bay Area, and I work in Oakland and San Francisco, so I see it every day, and I just wanted to know how you would start to tackle the problem, and is it even possible with the liberals running pretty much all of Northern California?
Well, I mean, the only way that you are possibly going to be able to actually solve homelessness is with both carrot and stick. So what that means is that you have to put people in mandatory drug dry out. You have to ensure that you have the capacity to forcibly place people in mental health contingency situations where they can't take care of themselves and make sure they take their drugs. And then you have to criminalize loitering. You have to criminalize trespass. I mean, you cannot have people pooping on the streets. You have to arrest them, and you have to give them a choice. Either you go to a drug dry-out facility and do what you need to do to get clean, or you go to a mental health facility and you do what you need to do in order to not be living with severe schizophrenia.
He never takes a breath when he's talking. It's so exhausting. But okay. He says mandatory drug tryouts, forcibly place people in mental health contingency situations, and criminalize loitering. Out of everything he's saying there, notice how none of those solutions just straight up include housing the homeless. It's fascinating. He's making the assumption that every single homeless person is mentally ill or on drugs, or a drug addict, pretty much. That is the situation that faces every single homeless person, and they need to be arrested. Loitering needs to be criminalized, and the rest obviously just have mental illness, and they need to be placed in mental health institutions against their will. I'm not saying that there aren't homeless people who are on drugs. Obviously, that is true, and obviously there are mentally ill homeless people. That's also true. But the idea that constitutes 100% of the homeless population is ridiculous. And even if it did, the idea that they just need to be arrested and locked away and medicated or whatever the case may be, he is just more interested in getting rid of the quote-unquote eyesore. He's not interested in helping people. His whole thing, obviously, with the solutions that he's proposing here is, I need these people out of my face. I need them out of sight, out of mind. Just get them away from me. Nothing that he has suggested here has anything to do with helping people.
And push back against that. Or you can go to jail. And those are the there's no choice where you get to sit on the street and loiter and spread disease and poop on the street and clutter up the street with garbage. That is not an effective choice. You're not allowed to do that. The problem, is not one that the media like to make out the problem of homelessness as a problem of economic misfortune and that the vast majority of homeless people just can't afford rent in San Francisco. It's not true. The problem is not rent. The problem is, in the main, drug problems, mental illness problems, and cities that have decided not to criminalize the people who can, create an upward path for themselves.
Okay, so he said it. He said the thing. He confirmed it. He literally does believe that homelessness is caused strictly by drug problems and mental health issues. And it's never, the case that someone's just down on their luck. Of course, rent is not too high. That's not a thing. So there's no reason why anyone should be homeless. And if anyone is homeless, they should be treated as a criminal, essentially. When people say stuff like that, it genuinely, I understand that there are people who think differently than I do and who have different, different priorities politically than I do. But when people say things like that are just obviously not true to that extent, like, does Ben Shapiro literally believe this? Or is he just straight up grifting and lying right now? Because I have a very hard time believing that he doesn't understand that homelessness can be caused by a number of other factors besides mental illness and drug addiction, which, by the way, those are real factors, but it just confounds me completely that he just dismisses all the other reasons that someone could be homeless. And even for the reasons, even when someone is homeless because of drug addiction or mental illness, I don't understand this mindset of, well, they need to be treated like a criminal. None of what he's saying makes any sense.
So, how do you say that some people don't have privilege when you basically just said that trans people aren't valid? They're not a thing. They're just girls pretending to be boys or boys pretending to be girls.
Okay.
Like, okay.
Oh, someone's excited. Okay.
It's biological, but gender is a completely different thing.
No, gender is not disconnected from sex. So.
It's not completely disconnected, but it's still a cultural thing. It's still from society. It's
Okay. No, it is not in the mind. Okay. You're not a man if you think you're a man. And I didn't say pretending, or if I did, I shouldn't have said pretending. Let me amend.
said playing.
Okay, I said a boy who thinks he's a girl. That's the usual phraseology I use. Not playing. I usually say a boy who thinks he's a girl or a girl who thinks he's a boy, which is technically what we're talking about here. As far as the actual psychological issues at play, it used to be called gender dysphoria or gender identity disorder. Now they call it gender dysphoria. The idea that sex or gender are malleable is not true. Okay, and I'm not denying your humanity if you're a transgender person. I am saying that you are not the sex to which you claim to be.
I'm pretty confident that this is intentional dishonesty at this point. Notice how he is saying sex and not gender, right? He's saying you're not the sex you claim to be. Well, the term is transgender, right? Transgender. So, he's saying sex is not malleable. Well, maybe, but gender is, right? Gender is literally a social construct. And he is aware of that. And instead of trying to argue why gender is not a social construct, because he knows that it is, it seems that he's just willing to sneakily smuggle in sex for gender and pretend that they're completely interchangeable and mean exactly the same thing.
You're still a human being, and you're a human being with an issue that I wish you Godspeed in dealing with in whatever way you see fit. But if you are going to dictate to me that I'm supposed to pretend that men are women and women are men, no. My answer is no. I'm not going to modify basic biology because it threatens your subjective sense of what you are.
You see what he did there? It was subtle, but did you catch that? It's genius, really. Now he's trying to make it seem like, well, he's the victim because he is being burdened with having to acknowledge someone else's stated gender, right? So you are burdening him with being a decent person. And that now just apparently now he is being oppressed now. Like how dare you place this great burden on me?
Let me ask you this. Okay, I won't ask you how old. I will ask you how old you are. Okay, because you're young enough that it's probably not insulting to ask you. So.
I'm 22, so I'm probably young and naive, right?
No. Why aren't you 60? Why aren't you 60? And why can't you identify as 60? Why?
It's so weird how he genuinely thinks this is like this big gotcha moment, right? Like he definitely got the young and naive 22-year-old with that one. Why can't you be 60? Why can't you identify as 60? Why can't you identify as a mermaid? Why can't you identify? Like it's this ridiculous talking point that gets thrown around. Well, if you can say that you're, a gender other than what you were born as, then why can't you say you're anything? Why can't you say you're 60, right? Like this is the big ace card, the gotcha that they conservatives in general, but in Shapiro in particular right now, thinks is the ultimate trump card. But guess what? That's not a gotcha. It's not a trump card. It doesn't actually prove anything. And I'll explain. I'm about to unload right now and definitively answer once and for all why that is not the gotcha that conservatives think it is. So if you're conservative and you're watching this right now, pay close attention. I'm going to break it down for you. Gender expression is literally just that. It is a social construct. It's a social construct. And if you don't believe that, think about this for 2 seconds, right? Just forget about trans men and trans women. Just think about a term that I'm sure you've heard your entire life and you've never thought twice about. You've never questioned it. What is a tomboy? What is a tomboy exactly? Because I know we've all heard that term and none of us have ever really questioned it, but we all know what it is, right? And ask yourself, why is that a thing? Why is that a thing? Why is there even a word for tomboy? Because those are not trans, right? They're not trans people. A tomboy is just merely a girl who most of the time is stereotypically male in either appearance or the preference of activities in things that are stereotypically preferred by males, right? That's what a tomboy is. So we understand that even though you can be a female or a male, whatever, you can act in a way that is atypical from your assigned gender. So if you don't have any problem understanding that concept, then just take it a step further, right? Just take it a step further. All a transgender individual is someone whose gender identity does not at all match their assigned sex at birth. Okay, so there's a tomboy might be a girl who still identify like she's still mostly, she still mostly identifies with femininity, but there are certain aspects of her personality that relates more so to traditional masculine presentations. But for someone who's like a step beyond that, and I'm not using the correct language and terminology, don't take this as absolute gospel by any means, and I'm probably not doing it justice the way that I should. But just think about it like that. Like, if your gender expression, your gender identity does not at all or very rarely matches your assigned sex at birth, then your gender is not the same as your sex. It's really just that simple. There is no rocket science to it. That's the reason why it doesn't make sense to say, why can I identify as a manatee? Well, a manatee is not a social construct, right? A manatee is an animal. Why can I identify as 60? 60 is not a social construct. It refers to how many years ago you were born. It's literally not close to being comparable. It is the very reason why high heels, perfect example, high heels were initially, when they were created, it was male fashion. Now it's female fashion. Like, gender expression changes, it's fluid. No matter what you think of as being stereotypically male, that can change. That can change. And that is the difference between gender and sex. And I don't understand why that is so difficult for people to understand.
What is the problem with you identifying as 60?
It's not the same as gender. You can't just...
You're right. Age is significantly less important than gender. You can't magically change your gender. You can't magically change your sex. You can't magically change your age.
You can still legally change it. People recognize
You can't legally change your age, by the way.
Obviously, you can change your name, you can change your sex, you can change your identity.
Just because you can do things legally doesn't mean that they are correct biologically. You could do lots of things in the past that were incorrect biologically and correct legally. For a long period of time in the United States, sterilization of the mentally ill took place. That didn't make it okay. Skinner versus Oklahoma. Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes wrote the decision.
Right. I still don't understand how you accepting these children that have gender.
It's not a matter of open-minded and accepting. I want them to get treatment that they see fit, but that's not involving me. The idea behind the transgender movement as a civil rights movement is the idea that all of their problems would just go away if I would pretend that they were the sex to which they claim membership.
You cannot convince me that he isn't doing that on purpose. He still always goes back to sex. You're not the sex you claim. You're not the sex that you claim you are. Like, he knows. To me, this is like the biggest piece of evidence that he understands the validity of transgenderism, and he is intentionally hiding the ball. Like, he's intentionally switching the language to make it seem as if transgender people are claiming one thing when they're really claiming another thing. He has to be doing this shit on purpose.
Alan, in New York, you're on the Ben Shapiro Show. Go for it, Alan.
How you doing, Ben? Longtime fan. I wanted to ask you about abortion. So I think that the left is absolutely disgusting in the way that they celebrate abortion, like what Williams did at the Golden Globes. However, because I come from a medical background, I'm a dental student right now, I think that there should be a cutoff date at which the fetus becomes a viable fetus, where if it were to be preterm, it would be able to survive. I think that should be, and it's a good compromise between the left and the right. I just wanted to know your thoughts about that.
Yeah, it's hard to make a compromise on the basis of viability simply because viability is such a vague standard. First of all, it's never been completely defined what viability constitutes. So
the caller asked about compromise, and this genius wants to point to the fact that there is no exact consensus among medical professionals as to, when viability happens with the fetus. Well, yeah, of course, it's not going to be an exact moment in time when, okay, now the fetus is specifically viable at this exact moment during the gestation period. Like, of course, it doesn't work that day. There's, a generally agreed upon range, and that's the whole point of a compromise. Like, we can work within that window, right? So he's intentionally obfuscating the facts to make it seem like this is some unsolvable problem.
Some people will say viability outside the womb without mom's help. Well, what about the help of machines? What if we develop artificial wombs? What about all the people? I mean, frankly, a baby outside the womb without mom's help will die also, right? I mean, if you've ever had a young child, you know that children without any care will quickly plot if you don't take care of them. Viability is a very difficult moral standard to uphold. Also, scientifically, it's difficult to uphold it. Also, it's difficult to explain why exactly viability should be the standard for whether or not a human life is valuable or not.
I'm for sure starting to notice a pattern here. Ben just talks and talks and talks. Definitely is a master of a gitch gallop. And then hopefully after hearing him talk for a while, your ears get a little bit exhausted and you miss the fact that he slipped something in that has nothing to do with anything. So what he just slipped in right there, right before I paused the clip, is it's hard to see why viability should be the measure of why a human life is valuable. Being pro-abortion rights has nothing to do with valuing human life. No one is saying that women should be able to get abortions because unborn children or fetuses or whatever you want to call it, are not valuable. That is not the argument. It's about bodily autonomy. That is it. That is the point. He is again smuggling in a straw man argument to defeat.
Jeremy in Fort Worth, Texas. You're on the Ben Shapiro Show. Go for it, Jeremy.
Hi, Ben. Just want to say I'm a big fan of your politics. I think you do a great job. My question is a little bit more philosophical. I've seen your discussions with people like Sam Harris in the past. You talked about morality, free will, stuff like that. I've always found them really fascinating, but they always seem to be cut so short. I've heard you defend things like the existence of free will by saying like concepts like responsibility don't make sense unless free will exists. My question for you is, like, why do you think this is the case? Why can't we be held responsible for our actions if free will doesn't exist?
So I think the answer, Jeremy, is inherent in this in the question that you just asked. You said, how can we be held responsible? Why can't we be held responsible for our actions if free will doesn't exist? And the answer, in my view, is that they're not our actions if free will doesn't exist. Like, what makes an action yours? The fact that you were the body that made the action happen, technically speaking, or the fact that you actually made the decision that made the action happen. So the sort of Baruch Spinoza, the philosopher, his view of the universe is that free will does not exist, that we are effectively stones that have been thrown, but have the misimpression that we are moving under the force of our own will.
Reasonable people can disagree about whether or not we have free will, and it's a fairly complex topic, so I'm not going to be too harsh on him for that take. My only issue with that opinion that he just gave is that he seems to be conflating will and free will. And I don't know if he's doing that on purpose or not. I'm going to just give him the benefit of the doubt this time that he's making an innocent mistake in this particular instance. But the difference between will and free will is you can very much not have free will, but still have the will to do something, right? If I fall off the stage because I took a misstep, that was neither will nor free will. I just fell. It was an accident, right? If I fell off the stage because someone pushed me, they didn't have free will either, but they had will. They had agency, and that's what they did. There's a whole host of reasons why it's difficult to grasp how someone could have will and not necessarily free will. But it's easier if you think about it in this sense. Will just simply means the physical ability to do something. Free will is choosing or having the option to choose to do that, or to want to do that rather. So I can choose to drink whiskey. I cannot choose the fact that I like whiskey. The fact that whiskey tastes good to me is not a choice that I made. I tried it. It tastes good to me. I can choose to not drink whiskey, right? Even though I like how it tastes. But again, having the will to stop is also not really free, because there are people who drink who cannot stop. It's not that they don't want to. They want to stop. They cannot stop. And that's where we get addiction from. If you think about it in those terms, right, it becomes apparent that there is definitely a difference between will and free will. And I think he's taking the quote from Spinoza a little bit too literally. I'll just read it real quick. The actual quote from Spinoza was, "I have set forth that a thing is called free, which exists and acts solely by the necessity of its nature. For instance, God is free in that he exists solely by the necessity of his nature. Likewise, God knows himself and all else solely by the necessity of his nature. You will say, a stone once set in motion continues to move from necessity. There is also the case with a dog, a horse, and with man, insofar as he is considered a part of nature. For man is said to be free because he is aware of his actions, and he is ignorant of the causes by which he is determined. A child believes that it desires milk freely. An angry child believes that it wishes freely to strike the one who offends it. A timid child believes that it wishes freely to flee from what it fears. Therefore, an infant believes that it acts from a free decision, and this is the reason why an infant is moved to cry by whatever torments it." So if you actually break down what Spinoza was saying there, he was actually, as far as I'm interpreting it, maybe I'm wrong. Someone, please correct me if that's the case in the comments. But the way I'm interpreting Spinoza's quote there is that he's making a clear distinction between will and free will. We have the will, we have the ability to act in certain ways. We can do action A or action B, but the fact that we are moved to action A or action B is not entirely up to us, or not up to us at all, really.
The problem is that once it is society's fault, or once it is the environment's fault, or once it is genetics' fault, everything that you do, why should you be punished on a moral level for your action? Now, you could make a social engineering argument that what is best for society is for people who have a certain biological predisposition toward certain criminal activity to be put in jail. That's not a responsibility argument. That's a social shaping message. But the question of moral responsibility is, why would you be held morally responsible for an action that is not your fault?
He gets so close. He got so close to the point. Oh my goodness, it's amazing. For a second, I thought just maybe Ben Shapiro is going to have a breakthrough. Yes, Ben. That's exactly the point. There is no moral justification for punishing people for actions that are largely beyond their control, because we don't really have free will. You can, in fact, make an argument that regardless of whether or not they are directly responsible for their actions, if someone is a clear danger to society, they should be sequestered from society. Exactly. There you go. You're getting so close to thinking more like a leftist. And even then, by the way, just because someone deserves, or not deserves, but just because someone needs to be sequestered from the rest of society for their safety and ours, that also doesn't mean that sequestering needs to be inhumane. That's not a requirement. We just need to keep them safe. We need to keep the rest of the population safe. So close to the point, Ben. Carry on.
Zach in Indiana, you're on the Ben Shapiro Show. Go for it, Zach.
Hi, Ben. I just want to say that I agree with you on most things that you say, but whenever I bring up your arguments on racism or white privilege to friends of opposing views, they say what you say is bullshit, and that you can't speak on the subject because you're not black and don't understand their daily struggles in society, and that you blatantly ignore obvious cases of racially motivated acts against black people, like with Khalif Browder or Trayvon Martin. So what would your response be to that?
So you have to take each individual circumstance under the conditions in which it was committed. So I will admit that I don't know the first name that you refer to there, so I will have to look up that case. The Trayvon Martin case is a particular case where the Justice Department under Barack Obama found there was no racial motivation to that particular killing. I mean, the entire killing was dismissed by a jury because the case was that Trayvon Martin at the time of the shooting was sitting atop George Zimmerman and banging his head into the ground, according to witness testimony and forensic evidence. So that is not a great case of racism.
I could allow myself to be filled with rage regarding Ben Shapiro's intentional mischaracterization of the events leading up to Trayvon Martin's death. But instead of allowing myself to get angry, I will reference a well-known legal principle known as res ipsa loquitur, which roughly translates to the thing speaks for itself, and I will allow the thing to speak for itself.
Something's wrong with him. Yeah, he's coming to check me out. He's got something in his hands. I don't know what his deal is. They always get away.
Are you following him?
Yeah.
Okay, we don't need you to do that.
Okay.
911, do you need police, fire, medical?
Maybe both. I'm not sure. There's just someone screaming outside.
Okay, and is it a male or female?
It sounds like a male.
Okay, and you don't know why?
I don't know why. I think they're yelling help, but I don't know. Just send someone quick. Say stop.
Okay, does he look hurt?
I can't see him. I don't want to go out there. I don't know what's going on. So they're sending.
So you think he's yelling help?
Yes.
All right, what is your phone number?
Just there's gunshots.
You just heard gunshots?
Yes.
If you want to talk about a great case of racism, then you would talk about the case of Walter Scott up in South Carolina, which I have talked about extensively, right? A case where a cop shot a black man in the back and then planted a gun on him. That guy went to jail for life. He should have gone to jail for life. When there are cases of actual racism, we're all on the same side here. My general statement is that there is no such thing as quote unquote institutional racism, that institutions are not racist, that if you are looking at individuals who are being racist, or if you can spot an institution that is acting in a racist fashion, we will all be on the same side. What I don't like is the generalized argument that America is institutionally racist or systemically racist when your only evidence of quote-unquote institutional or systemic racism is that there is disproportionate impact of a law on a particular population without looking into the actual activities within population. So, for example, when people say the criminal justice system is racist because a disproportionate number of black people are in jail.
It's super convenient how Ben Shapiro, who is a trained lawyer no less, just happens to completely lack any basic critical thinking skills. But I will help him out here, as infuriating as it is. And I'm just going to read some facts almost verbatim. You can check out my sources in the description. Black people are approximately 13.6% of the American population, but account for over 50% of exonerations. Innocent black people are about 7.5 times more likely to be convicted of murder than innocent white people. The convictions that led to murder exonerations with black defendants were almost 50% more likely to include misconduct by police officers than those with white defendants. On average, black murder exonerees spent 3 years longer in prison before release than white murder exonerees. Innocent black people are almost 8 times more likely than white people to be falsely convicted of rape. 69% of drug crime exonerees are black, and 16% are white. That means that innocent black people are 19 times more likely to be convicted of drug crimes than innocent whites, a much larger disparity than we see for murder and rape, despite the fact that white and black Americans use illegal drugs at similar rates. And lastly, whites out-earn blacks at every educational level, whether we're talking about high school dropouts, some college, associates, bachelors, professional degrees, doctorates. At every single educational level, white people out-earn black people. And in fact, white people with bachelor's degrees on average out-earn black people with master's degrees. Now, are these all just a series of unfortunate coincidences, or is this perhaps some salient evidence that, there may be some systemic racism deeply ingrained in American life?
Hey, Ben, so I wanted to ask you a question. You said earlier that a lot of Democrats are uncomfortable looking at pictures of children that are being aborted. Yeah, I would say that you and many other Republicans would feel equally uncomfortable looking at pictures of Sandy Hook victims who were shot. How can you honestly stand up here and say that you support abortion, you support government intervention to make abortion illegal, which is designed to kill someone, and yet you can stand up here and say you don't want government intervention for guns, which are also designed to kill people?
Because guns are not designed to kill children. Guns are designed to kill bad guys if operated by a proper person. There's not an abortion in the world that doesn't end with the death of a baby.
The NPCs in the crowd are actually clapping for this stupid shit, and it boggles my fucking mind because what the fuck did he just say? Honestly, guns are meant to kill. That's it. That's the whole sentence. They were designed specifically to end human life. That is what guns accomplish. They're not meant to end the life of bad guys, evil guys, murderers, rapists, whatever the case is. They're meant to end human life, period. That's it. No distinction. A gun does not care anything about what type of person it's being used on. That's not how that works.
Honestly, the reason, I have no problem with looking at the pictures of gun violence victims other than the problems any other human being, left or right, would have with looking at those pictures, which is that they're horrific and deeply disturbing and very upsetting. But I don't feel any sense of guilt or avoidance. Like, I can't look at this picture because I bear some sort of responsibility for this. It is impossible not to look at a picture of an aborted baby and say this was disconnected from the act that I approve, because the act is the killing of the baby.
Okay, I'm going to use your own logic here for a minute, Ben Shapiro. I'm going to use your logic, not mine. I'm not going to use my moral standards, my judgment. I'm going to use your moral code and your logic here for a second. So you are morally opposed to abortions because you think it is infanticide, basically. Okay, and you feel like more restrictions on abortion will reduce the number of abortions that happen. But you don't think that more restrictions on gun ownership will result in fewer gun deaths or gun violence. Explain how you got to that conclusion. Basically, if you were being intellectually honest, which you are allergic to apparently, you would admit that you just don't have a problem with gun violence, but you have a problem with women's rights to choose what they do with their own bodies. That is what this comes down to, honestly, at the end of the day. That's really all it comes down to, because you're being intellectually dishonest.
Okay, so but if all people, right, you said that once the cells come together, you said those are considered people, which I can understand. I can get
No, I
behind
said that's
that.
considered a human life.
A human life, right.
Yes.
Why is this human life being killed and another human life being killed by gun violence? Why is that any different?
Again, it's not a matter of the value of the human life being different. It's equally as evil and tragic and horrific and disgusting when people kill fully formed children who are outside the womb. My point is that the act that connects to the killing of the children is not connected to my position on guns. The act that connects to the killing of unborn babies is connected to the legalization of abortion. The reason that I want people to be able to exercise their Second Amendment rights is to shoot pieces of like the people who go into schools and shoot up children.
Okay, so you're trying to talk around it and bore us with excessive language, but you're basically just admitting it right now. You care about the right to own guns. You don't care about women's bodily autonomy. That's it. Like, it's really just that simple. You can try to dress it up all you want, but at the end of the day, that's all it comes down to. Because if you were genuinely concerned about human life, right, then you would have some concern about gun control. Like, that would be at least somewhat of a priority to you, right? But you're not being morally or logically consistent here because you don't really feel the need to be, because that isn't what your concern is. As you just said, your concern is you want people to have the right to carry guns. You just don't think that bodily autonomy for pregnant people is important. Got it.
Right, I have two kids. They both go to a Jewish school, which means they are on the target list for somebody out there. Right? Jewish schools are disproportionately targeted, unfortunately, in the United States. I went to a Jewish school when I was in high school. There were bomb threats legitimately every couple of months. In 1999, there was a white supremacist who drove by our Jewish day school, saw an armed guard outside, proceeded to drive away, went to the West Valley JCC, and shot up the West Valley JCC. The reason that I'm in favor of gun rights is because I want that armed guard outside carrying the gun to dissuade people from going inside the school and shooting the kid.
Remember, the only way to stop a bad guy with a gun is for there to be a good guy with a gun. That's it. That's the only way.
I'm not in favor of...
I just have a quick question about abortion. I was wondering, the way you're describing it sounds like killing of babies, whether unborn or born, sounds like a first-degree murder case. I just want to make sure I'm getting that right. Punishment for first-degree murder is life imprisonment without parole. I was wondering if you think people who commit abortions should be sentenced to life imprisonment without parole.
And doctors, specifically?
Doctors or mothers.
Okay, so the position of the pro-life movement has been for decades that mothers should not be punished for abortion, that women are, at least in part, as much a victim of the abortion as the child. And that springs largely from ignorance about what exactly is being killed. Very few women are actively saying, sure, it's a baby in my womb, take it out. Most of them are saying it's a ball of tissue, it's nothing, it doesn't mean anything. I've been told by Planned Parenthood that it means nothing, so go ahead and perform this polyp surgery. And so that's acting out of ignorance. It lacks the mens rea, and sort of legal terminology that would be necessary in order to establish something like a first-degree murder charge. The same thing does not hold true for Kermit Gosnell. The same thing does not hold true for abortion doctors who are fully aware that a 20-week-old baby is in fact a baby, and who are aware that an incipient human life is in fact an incipient human life. Now,
more of the same disingenuous argument. I'm starting to sound like a broken record at this point. Obviously, it has nothing to do with human life. It has everything to do with bodily autonomy, and even trying to make it about human life is an invalid argument, just onto itself, on its face. It's an invalid argument because even though Ben Shapiro may think he has this reasonable take about a fetus being human life, who's to say that someone with an even more conservative, more extreme view isn't quote unquote correct? Like, for example, why not take it back a bit further? Like, make it illegal to use a Plan B pill, or any sort of birth control or condoms or anything along those lines. Just because any steps that you take to prevent getting pregnant in the first place is potentially prematurely ending a human life. So this whole idea of, oh, it's a human life and it's precious, and so that's nonsense. That's obviously nonsense. This has everything to do with bodily autonomy.
Okay, so you said whatever disincentive is necessary. Is there a limit onto what lengths you would go if you were imposing policy to prevent abortion or like?
Yeah, I mean, I said I don't think that a punishment is appropriate for the mother. I think when it comes to abortion doctors who are making their living by killing presumably thousands of unborn children, there are very few lengths to which I think that I would not go in terms of government policy in punishing those doctors and giving them jail time.
So doctors should be punished and sent to jail for providing necessary health care to pregnant people, because abortions are actually needed in many cases. In some cases, it is just a matter of preference, perhaps, but also in a lot of cases, it is actually needed. So doctors should go to jail for that. I'm trying to understand the logic here.
So my question is very quick. What is your favorite argument for God's existence and why?
Okay, so my favorite argument for God's existence is that I believe in free will. Okay, the reason that I think this is an argument for God's existence is because if you believe that human beings are essentially just balls of meat wandering around aimlessly in the universe, the kind of Spinoza's stone that thinks that it was moving of its own accord but actually was thrown, if you believe that and you don't believe in free will, then there's an internal coherence and logic to it. If you believe that you have the ability to make independent choices, that you can actually supersede your own biological drives and the environment around you to any extent, even to the smallest extent, this means that you believe in something that can't actually be proved by science, but that you are living every single day. And the notion that you have that will, and not only that you have that will, but that will is capable of comprehending the universe around you, that your will is your ideas, your ability to comprehend the universe is a reflection of a reality, of an objective truth that is out there. That says to me that there is a God, there's a common source that stands behind that objective truth and stands behind the mind that can comprehend that truth, or sort of a Kantian argument for the existence of God.
Yeah, well, that's, Ben, that's like a really cool opinion, bro. That's a cool opinion. You just spotted a whole bunch of words, opinions. Cool. But, before I actually address that, gotta say it's a little interesting that he's quoting Spinoza again. I didn't realize he was such a big fan. That's looks like an interesting aside. But okay, so first of all, he says he believes in free will, which is cool. I disagree, but like I said before, reasonable people can disagree about whether or not free will exists. But if he wants to hinge his belief in God in his belief in free will, guess what? You also have to demonstrate that free will exists. So even if I was to grant everything else that he says after this as fact, which it's not, but even if I just grant everything else that he says, he hasn't even done the work of demonstrating his first premise, which is his belief in free will. Okay, you can believe in whatever you want, man. That's cool, but like, how do you know that we have free will? And okay, so he believes in free will, and so just putting aside the fact that he hasn't demonstrated that for a second, he goes on to say that our ideas and ability to comprehend the universe around us is a reflection of an objective truth, which means that there is a God or a common source or a God that stands behind that objective truth. Like, how do you know that? I don't, like, again, these are literally just words and opinions. He's pretty much pulling a Jordan Peterson here, just saying a bunch of stuff. Why does the fact that we have ideas and our ability to comprehend the universe around us, why does that mean that there's a reflection of an objective truth? Like, why can't we just understand stuff and have ideas without there being an objective truth or God? That doesn't make sense. Like, if you don't understand how the brain works, I mean, that's cool, but I'm just saying, nothing about what he says, like literally everything that he said in that entire, none of it is grounded in reality. None of it, he did nothing to substantiate any of his claims, and he gets applause for this. I'm just, out of everything that he said so far, even though this is one of his, it's not nearly as objectionable as some of his other opinions that he stated before. This is pretty, like, he might as well have just said blah, blah, blah. I think it's just as impactful as far as I'm concerned.
Why do you believe you're right about trans people given the American Psychological Association, American Medical Association, American Psychoanalytic Association? I can go on for about 5 more associations that are very prominent and govern the existing like health government or health industries within like the major Western countries. And all of these associations have multiple thousands of doctors, sociologists, psychologists, and with PhDs in their respective fields backing the idea that sex and gender are different, effectively gaining the medical consensus for sex and gender being 2 different concepts, yet you have a different opinion.
Okay, so sex and gender are 2 different concepts.
Ben Shapiro just admitted that sex and gender are 2 different things, so we might be getting really close to a breakthrough. Let's see what happens.
But gender is tied to biology. So one of the big problems that you see in sort of the argument in favor of trans rights is this notion that gender and sex are completely separable. They're not completely separable. If they are completely separable, then this means that identifying people by their subjective gender really has no relevance as to whether they are a male or a female. Male and female are biological terms. So using terminology like male and female to describe a self-perception of maleness or femaleness is sort of a bizarre way of arguing whether a thing is a man or a woman. So here's my question. It's an argument that my friend Matt Walsh likes to make. What is a woman? Define what a woman is without reference to the word woman, please.
What is the point of conceding that sex and gender are 2 different things if you're going to then act like they are still the same thing in your argument anyway? So what's the difference? What's the difference then? What is the difference between sex and gender, Ben? Because you're not making that distinction at all.
So this is actually a logical fallacy called a red herring. You're asking me a question in order to actually challenge my question without actually
No, it isn't. I'm saying that it really is not. I'm saying that biology, I'm agreeing with you that the notion of gender, which is effeminateness or masculinity, can be different from biology in the sense that biology is just pure male or pure female. But to suggest that there is such a thing as an effeminate male is not to suggest that an effeminate male is now a woman. Transgenderism makes the argument that if you believe that you are a woman, you are therefore a woman. Or if you believe that you are a man, you are therefore a man. I disagree with this. There are objective measures as to whether you're a man or a woman. There are objective measures as to whether you're male or female. There's certainly a spectrum when with regard to effeminateness versus masculinity.
Bro, you just said it yourself. You literally just said it. You had the breakthrough without having the breakthrough. I'm so confused right now. Ben Shapiro literally just admitted that there is a spectrum along which masculinity and femininity exists, right? And this is separate from physical sex. So if there's a spectrum of gender expression, not tied to your actual biological sex, for example, you could have an effeminate male, right? Does it not make sense that on the extreme end of that spectrum lies a transgender person? Like, I'm not like, obviously not every single individual with, not every single biological male with feminine traits is obviously, it's automatically trans, right? Because like Ben just said it himself, probably even better than I've ever said it in the past, it exists along a spectrum. But on the extreme ends of those spectrum, genius, obviously that's where we have trans individuals, right? I'm not like, what is so hard to understand about that? He literally said it himself. No one put the words in his mouth. He literally said it himself. He refuses to arrive at the correct conclusion on purpose.
So then would you agree not banning critical race theory in public like in the theory that they are covers, but would you be a proponent of having the education that these institutions have been used to attack other minority groups across America, and that it has had historic scars that are still we still see today?
So I wouldn't say that the institutions have been used to abuse I wouldn't say due process of law has been used to abuse minorities. I would say that people have refused to implement due process of law because they wanted to abuse minorities, of course. And of course you'd have to teach about that. I mean, that's the entire history of segregation and the subjugation of black Americans up to the Civil Rights Act, for sure. Of course. And this is why it's such a lie when people say that if you don't want to teach critical race theory, you don't want to teach history. I'm fine with teaching every ugly part of American history. What I'm not fine with is the idea that the foundational ideas of the United States of America, the notion that we are created equal before God with certain inalienable rights and that government was instituted in order to protect these rights, I disagree with the fundamental idea that these were a cover for power designed in order to subjugate black Americans. I think that's a lie.
I mean, again, cool opinion, bro. You could think it's a lie all you want, but that's exactly what it was. That's exactly what it was. I think it's insulting even to give any real analysis on this. Like, you're intentionally being dishonest at this point.
Okay, so I don't want to misinterpret your position, but it's your belief. Tell me if I'm right or wrong about this, okay? It's your belief that America is fundamentally a skillsocracy, as you call it, as opposed to a meritocracy, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Then how...
Because I don't connect moral merit with intellect. People are born...
Yeah, okay, I get that, yeah. Nice. That's good. My question is, how do you explain the fact that the vast majority of American inequality is caused by the people who you know, the neighborhoods you grew up in, the amount of wealth your parents have, and thousands and thousands and thousands of other, whether you believe that race is involved or not, but thousands of other non-skill-based factors that are integral to moving ahead in the American system?
So I don't think that that's true primarily. What I think is that all of those things have an impact on the skills that manifest in the marketplace. No question. But what the market measures is at the point of the skills. It's not measure. If there's a skilled person who's coming from an impoverished background where there's a lot of single motherhood and crime, for example, and that person has high skills, that person is going to do fine.
If a person with high skills is going to do fine regardless of their background, then why does that correlation exist in the first place, Ben? Why is it that poor people are less likely, or people who come from poor families, why is it that they are less likely to succeed? Why is it that minorities are less likely to succeed? And this is regardless of their skill, regardless of their education level. Statistics show time and time again that even with similar education, similar skills, if you are disadvantaged in any way, especially if you come from a poor family, or if you are a minority, you are far less likely to succeed than someone who comes from a more privileged background, someone who is white, someone who comes from a rich family. It's like you are acknowledging the very real correlation between these things, but also saying, oh no, but at the end of the day, the only thing that really matters is your skills. It's a skillocracy. That doesn't make any sense, Ben.
Okay, but the problem is that all of those things can contribute to a lack of skills, right? This is part of my argument, and the only way to actually alleviate that problem is to change the cultural milieu that makes it very difficult for people to achieve a certain level of skills in particular communities. Single motherhood makes it very difficult, for example, for kids to grow up in an environment where they have a solid family home, where they're studying a lot at home, where education is of primary value as opposed to just getting through the day crime-free, for example, and without being victimized by neighbors, high crime areas, right? All of these things are things that we can alleviate, and I think that we should alleviate them. These are real problems to people fully developing their skills. The point that I'm making is that the system of economics is not punishing people for their upbringing, it's punishing them for lack of skills, which may in fact be an effect of their upbringing, right? But
Ben, you are saying one thing that is actually true or has some truth to it, and using it to completely obscure something else that's also true, right? Yes, it is true that if you come from a poorer family, for example, that will put you at a disadvantage for obtaining the skills needed to succeed. However, even when we control for those situations, so in other words, even when we take into account that poor people are less likely to obtain certain skills or attain certain educational levels, for the few that do manage to break through, they are still less likely to succeed. Like, that is something that still has to be accounted for, Ben. The two things can be true. You do understand that, right?
that does not mean that primarily the skillsocracy is punishing people for their environment or for their race. It is punishing them for the fact that when it comes time for them to go to the job market, they don't have the same skills as the person next to them. So the question becomes not, how do we get rid of the skillsocracy? The question becomes, how do we get rid of the obstacles to people who could be more skilled becoming more skilled? And that means creating cultural institutions that matter. It means creating communities. It means trying to ensure that people have a father and a mother in the home, trying to make sure that people can live in safe neighborhoods where there are thriving communities, where there are jobs available.
How about reinstating affirmative action? Will that help? Would that help, Ben? Reinstating affirmative action? What do you think?
Right, that would effectuate a better opportunity set to enter the skillsocracy. But what I see is people attacking the distribution of reward at the skills level as opposed to attacking the underlying problem, which creates a lot of the inequalities you're talking about.
Yeah. I'd rather. Can I talk? Yeah. Oh no, you're fine. Yeah. So I was wondering, you believe that things like single motherhood, things like growing up in high crime areas, are inherently cultural, rather than to do with any institutions or any inequalities that are part of American society institutionally?
No, I think that history has a long tail. But I think that the only way that you fix that is by changing the incentive structure for individuals right now. So I think that you can blame the amount of crime in a particular community on a long history of disinvestment in that community 50, 60 years ago. I don't think it's going to change a damn thing. And I don't think pouring money into the community is necessarily the solution. I think if you're looking at high crime levels, I think the best solution is you need more cops on the ground to stop the crime.
So Ben Shapiro, unironically, with a straight face, in public, intentionally, actually advocated for more cops on the street, but investing in neighborhoods, that's not a good idea. That's not a worthwhile endeavor, right? That's what he expects us to believe, that that's a good idea, right? I understand as a conservative, he's already coming from a different place than someone like myself, for example, but I just don't see what logical leaps has to happen, what mental gymnastics he's performing in his head to come to the conclusion that investing in neighborhoods is not a good solution, but over-policing is a good solution. Is it just so that there can be this perpetual cycle, perhaps, of, oh, look at all these black and brown people that we keep having to arrest. That means we need to put even more police in their neighborhoods so that we can crack down on the crime problem there that we're basically creating. Like it feels like more and more intentional targeting, right?
So when you have a solution like affirmative action, or you have a solution like benefiting people from lower income communities, and I know obviously there's a difference between affirmative action on the racial level and affirmative action on the economic level, you think that government policy should have no role in alleviating those inequalities, even though government policy purportedly in the past, even though I would argue currently, created those inequalities in the first place?
I think that any time the government attempts to remedy past discrimination by the use of current discrimination, all they are doing is effectuating discrimination and undermining the skillsocracy that allows for positive externalities.
Putting safeguards in place to correct decades-long intentional systemic racism is not current discrimination. It's correcting discrimination. It's correcting racism. It's like that old analogy of Monopoly, right? I didn't come up with this. Many people have used this analogy before. If, some people are playing Monopoly and one person is not allowed to play while everyone else continues to play, and they collect all these properties and they collect all this wealth. And now finally the other player gets to join the game. Is it fair that they just have to play by the same rules as everyone else? Nothing needs to be put into place to level the playing field a little bit, right? Like, just no, it's okay. You get to play now. That's what you're complaining about. You can stop complaining about the past. You get to play now, and that's all that matters, right? Like, does that make sense?
Yeah.
Hi, how are you? My question is regarding two very high-profile court cases going on right now, the Ahmaud Arbery trials and the Kyle Rittenhouse trials. And my question is, what do you believe would be the outcome of these trials and why?
Okay, so I think that there's what will happen and what should happen. I'm not going to try and predict what will happen because you cannot predict what juries are going to do. What should happen, Rittenhouse should be acquitted. He clearly acted in self-defense. That doesn't mean that I would send my 17-year-old over to Kenosha, Wisconsin in order to protect property and provide medical aid to people, but it does mean that the shootings that he committed were in self-defense. The evidence is pretty much as clear as day on that one. And the prosecutor has no case, and frankly, he's making a fool of himself. He looks like he got his law degree for turning in the tops of Cracker Jack boxes.
Ben Shapiro is clearly mischaracterizing the facts of the case. But regardless, many other legal experts, some of whom are actually not conservatives, have made the argument that the Kyle Rittenhouse verdict was legally defensible. And this is one of those situations where I don't give a shit if, legally speaking, he has a good case for self-defense or not. This is, to me, one of those cases where the law is just behind, if that's the case. Because it is quite obvious that he went there with the intention of shooting someone. He was looking for trouble. He was a minor who should not have even had a rifle to begin with. He went out of his way to place himself in a situation where he would have to shoot someone, and he got what he wanted. And if somehow, under some legal technicality, that counts as self-defense, I mean, cool for him, I guess, but I don't see how that's morally defensible, and I don't see how that should be self-defense. He literally went out of his way to be somewhere that he didn't need to be so that he could enact some sick fantasy of killing someone.
Considering that citizen's arrest is a widely outdated law, do you consider that it should be reformed?
It's difficult to reform citizen's arrest because, again, there are just so many areas where the cops are not available. I mean,
why does he go out of his way to avoid such simple questions? He asked you, should it be reformed? Not, would it be difficult to be reformed? Those are two very separate issues. Like, just answer the question. It's not that difficult, man.
Sorry, one last question is, do you believe that Rittenhouse traveled to Kenosha with the intent of stirring trouble or not?
I think that by the available evidence, he went there with the intent of providing medical aid and brought the gun because he thought the trouble might break out or could break out. I don't think that he went there to shoot anybody, if that's the question. And I think the prosecution's case that he went there to shoot somebody is undermined by pretty much every single fact on the ground, including his own behavior that night.
Come on, dude. You're just trolling at this point. I'm not even going to address this because I already did. But, I mean, come on, Ben. You're just trolling. He clearly went there with the intention of shooting people. But whatever. I'll be honest, guys, this video was supposed to be at least 30 to 45 minutes longer, but it was really hard sitting through Ben Shapiro's content. I'm sure you guys can relate. I just got tired of listening to his bad faith arguments, his poorly thought out arguments. It was just exhausting, and having to refute things that are obvious, also kind of exhausting. I was considering doing a video essay on Ben Shapiro. Let me know in the comments if that's something that you would be interested in seeing. I would like to get at least 200 likes on this video. Hit me up on Patreon, patreon.com/progressive writer. My goal is to do this full time. I have so many great ideas that I would love to share with you guys. and I would love to be able to post more consistently. So my goal is to do this full time. I'm trying to ratchet this channel up. Please, guys, show me some love on Patreon. Like, comment, subscribe, like I said. Thank you so much for watching.